16th of April, second Sunday of Easter. Sermon on John chapter 20, verses 19 to 31, 1 Peter chapter 1, verses 3 to 9, and Psalm 16, verse 11. For 15 years, my family and I were members of a religious cult. One Sunday morning, we were late for the meeting. We had a good excuse. But further into the service, the speaker began to talk about who were the spiritual ones in the congregation. "They're not ever late for the meeting," he began, before going on to list several other sorts of transgressors. Being late or missing meetings was a cardinal sin. And so this cult loved the story of Thomas, who missed a meeting and so didn't see Jesus when he revealed himself for the first time to his disciples. He missed the meeting, so he didn't have the privilege of seeing the risen Lord. They never seemed to explore further into the story, and so when a few years later we escaped from that religion and found our way to a church, it was a great joy to read and meditate on that interaction between Jesus and Thomas, to see how things worked out, and to discover afresh the God who is full of grace. I do that every time I read this story, and each year, when this passage appears in the lectionary on the second Sunday of Easter, I always preach on it. Humans love to judge and criticize others, to second-guess the reasons for what they've done or who they are. He's homeless, must be on drugs. She went to the food bank, must be a scrounger. Went in church last Sunday, probably lying in bed. The fact is, though, that we don't know. But even if we do, even if he is on drugs, she's scrounging, and they stayed in bed instead of going to church, who are we to judge? And of course, we don't know. We don't know why Thomas was not with the other disciples when Jesus first appeared to them. All we know is that when the others told him they had seen the Lord, he refused to listen and believe. Cult members aren't the only ones to judge. I have an old Bible commentary by Adam Clarke, who attacks Thomas gleefully. He first of all accuses Thomas of absenting himself and missing the inestimable blessing given by Jesus. No excuse then. He next accuses Thomas of becoming utterly unreasonable, obstinate, presumptuous and insolent, for refusing to believe his fellow disciples, all because of forsaking the assemblies of God's people. I wonder if Adam Clarke was secretly disappointed at the outcome of this story. He seems to have forgotten why Jesus died in the first place. So let's remind ourselves by looking at the words of another disciple in Peter's first letter. Peter praises God for his great mercy in giving us new birth into a living hope through the resurrection of Jesus Christ and into an inheritance that is imperishable, undefiled and unfading. That doesn't sound like a one strike and you're out sort of God who would reject someone for missing a meeting or doubting. It sounds like a God full of grace. That undeserved love and mercy poured out at the cross and demonstrated by Christ's defeat of death. What a narrow, limited God Adam Clarke envisages, as did the cult I was in. What a God lacking in grace, not our God at all. Thomas doubted. Haven't we done the same from time to time? Perhaps when others have been joyfully proclaiming some answer to prayer, have we felt a few sour grapes coming on? Or if someone shares a deep spiritual experience, are we tempted to write it off as a coincidence? We don't know what was in Thomas' mind, Perhaps he just felt patronized by the other disciples. However, he made his feelings quite clear. Unless I see the mark of the nails in his hands, and put my finger in the marks of the nails and my hand in his side, I will not believe. Thomas could not and would not believe that Jesus was alive. And so Jesus came again, full of understanding, forgiveness, and grace. Jesus invited Thomas to look and touch. It's one of the most wonderful demonstrations of grace in the Bible. The first time I had to read this account aloud in church, I broke down, overwhelmed by the love poured out on Thomas. It still brings tears to my eyes. It is such a contrast to the sour-faced judgment so common amongst humans. It's what Jesus died for. Thomas didn't need to touch. He spoke, though, with the first declaration of exactly who Jesus was and is, my Lord and my God. Thomas may have missed an inestimable blessing, as Adam Clarke suggests, but he was granted an even greater one. His words are recorded in the Scriptures, and they form the bedrock of the doctrine of the Holy Trinity, proclaiming Jesus as equal to the Father, both Lord and God. Thomas saw and believed. We, however, are also commended by Jesus because we believe, although we have not seen. Peter speaks of this in his letter. Although you have not seen him, you love him. And even though you do not now see him, you believe in him and rejoice with an indescribable and glorious joy, for you are receiving the outcome of your faith, the salvation of your souls. The grace that Jesus won for us when he poured out his life on the cross and then rose again must not be squandered or dispensed sparingly. It must not be withheld because of our judging of others. Let's finish with the words of the concluding verse of Psalm 16, which declares trust and security in God. You show me the path of life. In your presence there is fullness of joy and eternal delight at your right hand. If there is fullness of joy, how can we judge and condemn? Rather, we will accept and welcome, as the Lord himself has accepted and welcomed us.